This week, the world watches closely as Donald Trump returns to Asia for a visit charged with geopolitical significance. The spotlight is on the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in South Korea, where Trump is set to meet Chinese President Xi Jinping face-to-face for the first time since 2019. Amidst escalating U.S.-China trade tensions, looming tariff threats, and fragile semiconductor supply chains, the stakes are high. South Korea finds itself at a delicate crossroads, seeking to balance its role as a middle power between two giants amidst a $350 billion investments dilemma. Simultaneously, Trump says he won't meet with Kim Jong-un during Asia trip, adds uncertainty to regional security. Can Trump's visit pivot Asia-Pacific relations towards stability, or about the performance of power in the region? What will this summit truly signal for the future of Asia? Welcome to Think Tank.
Our world is becoming unhinged.
President Trump is set to reshape U.S.-China relations in his own style after dismantling decades of engagement during his first term. According to Wall Street Journal, recent high-level talks in Kuala Lumpur led to a framework agreement, paving the way for a major deal with Chinese leader Xi Jinping at the APEC summit in South Korea. The deal, largely transactional, could include China resuming U.S. new tariffs and ease fentanyl-related levies. Unlike his first term's ad hoc approach, Trump's second-term strategy entails a structured, leader-driven diplomatic calendar aimed at stabilizing the relationship for the coming year. Analysts view this as a tactical detente rather than a return to the past, recognizing enduring strategic rivalry and unresolved coal disputes, with each side buying time to prepare for the next phase of competition. Yes, President Donald Trump indicated that was unlikely to meet Northern Korean leader Kim Jong-un during his Asia trip, despite previously suggesting openness to a summit. Bloomberg stated that speaking on the way to South Korea ahead of his meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping, Trump emphasized his focus on China, while saying a future meeting with Kim would happen in the not-too-distant future. He downplayed North Korea's recent missile test as routine, noting Kim's very tight schedule, but maintained a good understanding between them. Regional allies urged caution amidst ongoing uncertainties. North Korea has expressed willingness to resume talks only if the United States abandons denuclearization demands. Trump also signaled indifference over recognizing North Korea as a nuclear power, acknowledging the country already possesses such weapons. The cautious stance highlights ongoing challenges in U.S.-North Korea diplomacy during the tense Asia tour.
In the ancient capital of Silla, where East once met West along Silk Road tributaries, a new crossroads emerges, not of caravans, but of tariffs, tech, and tie-ins. Donald Trump's return to Asia is not nostalgia, it's negotiation. With U.S. elections looming, His Gwangju's top tests whether epic can reset a fraying global order or merely stage manage it. Even dissent is silenced near the summit, a reminder that trade tensions run deep. At stake, $350 billion Korean investment pledge, semiconductor supply chains, and whether Washington's 15% blanket tariff on Seoul holds. While Trump meets NVIDIA's CEO and Korean tech titans showcase AI leadership, the real drama unfolds behind closed doors. Can he and Xi Jinping forge a truce before November 1st, when 100% tariffs on Chinese goods kick in? Xi's first Korea visit in 11 years coincides with rare earth export controls, economic chess mirroring strategic rivalry. Yet both leaders know walking away risks mutual pain. Meanwhile, Pyongyang tightens ties with Moscow, testing U.S. deterrence, and Trump teases a third Kim Jong-un meeting, a potential breakthrough or diversion. For President Lee, neutrality is survival. He hosts trilateral talks with Japan and the United States, avoids blocking a Trump-Kim encounter, and walks a tightrope between giants. In Gwangju, Korea is not just hosting a summit, it's asserting its role as a middle power broker. But in an age of decoupling, even soft power may not bridge hard divides.
And to explore the intricate dynamics behind Trump's Asia return and the multifaceted challenges at APEC, we welcome two distinguished experts from Washington. We are joined by Brent Sadler, Senior Researcher Fellow, Heritage Foundation. A very warm welcome. And joining him from Washington is Adrian Calamel, a national security expert specializing in geopolitical risk and U.S. strategy. Together, they will dissect the opportunities, risks, and political theater shaping this visit and its broader significance. A very warm welcome to our two guests, and we start off with Mr. Calamel. Sir, how significant is Trump's first Asia trip in his second term, especially the APEC summit in South Korea?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and good evening to all your viewers. As far as the importance of this trip, it's very important. Trump needs to work with our allies in that region to counterbalance China and Moscow as well. And this is part of it. This trip is part of it in dealing with talking to Korea. And we have to remember that it's a ceasefire that's there. They're still in the middle of a war. Well, not in the middle of a war, but it's, we've had a cessation in hostilities, a hot war for decades now, but it's always a concern there. So Korea is a concern. China is obviously a major concern. The One Belt, One Road initiative is a concern with China trying to corner and capitalize on energy as well as trade. And that's why it's important for Trump to work with Korea, Japan, Philippines, and we've seen him in Malaysia and these other countries to try and counterbalance what is China and the possible threat that they pose to Taiwan and the semiconductor industry. And that's why there's talk about rare earth minerals. Taiwan will probably be on the table, discussions about that. So it's an important meeting. It's an important meeting to try and serve as a counterbalance and try and pull together our allies or near peer allies in the region.
Mr. Sadler, what does the U.S.-China trade dynamic currently look like, and what does the upcoming Trump-Xi meeting aim to achieve?
Yes, thank you for having me on and back on your show today. Yeah, the economic situation between the two nations, you can't separate from the military dynamics at play right now as well. As China ratchets up the pressure, it just had a very large number of aircraft cross the median line in the Taiwan Straits and continue to build up and pressurize the Philippines and South China Sea. So with that military backdrop, you have trade negotiations. At the same time, the Chinese continue to support the Russians in their war effort against Ukraine, something that President Trump had hoped to resolve the very beginning of his second term in office, and yet still has eluded him, largely because of continued Chinese economic and even material support to the Russians. So getting a clear change in position on the Chinese with this regard, trade with Russia, I think is a part of the calculus in the trade negotiations, secondary sanctions from the United States, which are being threatened on China for that continued support. But trade on the Chinese side, they have put sanctions on rare earths. It's not quite the same. It's a bit asymmetric to the tariffs of the United States. It's far more harsh on the Chinese than it is on the U.S. from the rare earths. But the Chinese are making their point. And I'm not sure in the long run it will be helpful for their cause. But we shall see, as they say, in the next 12 hours when Trump and Xi sit down, if they sit down.
Sir, why if they sit down?
Why they're sitting down, I think the Chinese are hoping to get some concessions from the U.S. by simply offering the meeting. This is something they've been successful with numerous presidents from Washington, D.C. in past decades without giving any real concessions. The other is they have also started rounding up Chinese Christians, which is a violation of freedom of religion. And I suspect in past behavior, they will then relent and release these Chinese as a gesture of goodwill, as a form of concession, hoping the U.S. will respond in kind and in order to have a summit meeting. But President Trump's more than willing to walk away from a bad meeting, and the Chinese need to release these Chinese Christians on principle, not as a tool for getting a meeting with President Trump.
Mr. Calamel, could trade truce realistically stabilize U.S.-China tensions, or is it more of temporary electoral gesture?
No, that's a great question. This is on the surface. We have to understand that China is an enemy. China, Russia, and the Islamic Republic. Yeah, they're an enemy
of the United States?
Of the United States, of democracy, of countries around the world that want the...
Do you think, sir, we reached the level of saying or mentioning the terminology enemy between
sure.
the United States and China, which were allies a few months ago?
China is not an ally. If you look at their doctrine since 1992, 1993, they've been working off an unrestricted warfare doctrine. And that's why you bring up stuff like fentanyl in your broadcast earlier on. We have to understand that China, Moscow, and Tehran are all triangulating against us. So this on the surface is a little bit of soft power on the top with trade, but what we have to use is a combination of what I would call smart power. It's trade as well as sanctions, as well as tariffs. And with China, you have to be a little careful around your military posture. But we can't be cowards on this situation. We have to be forward posture. And Trump has talked about pivoting to Asia for quite some time, and we have to understand that China does not want the United States to be the world power that it is. China wants to dominate. So in that respect, I would say, yes, they are an enemy, and I have no problem saying that.
Okay. Mr. Sadler, could you comment, please, on Mr. Of course, Kalama and what he said? Do you read China and the United States as enemies?
Well, it only takes one side to decide that question. And China, we know from the Tiananmen Square papers after the 1989 crackdown by the Chinese Communist Party on, democracy movement there in Tiananmen Square in the capital of Beijing, that the Chinese Communist Party decided at that moment, while the bodies were still warm on the ground, that the United States, as the preeminent power in the West and a democratic power, was a lethal threat to the longevity and the continued legitimacy of the Chinese Communist Party. So they've decided, it's not one that the United States decided, and only in the last few years have you seen serious moves both in resources and authorities and political will to start to push back on the Chinese Communist Party. It's taken far too long, but again, the Chinese Communist Party decided long before.
Okay, Mr. Calamel, how is South Korea balancing its ambitions as a middle power with pressures from Washington and Beijing?
Well, South Korea is, stuck in this position which they always have. That's why we have so many troops stationed there. I would say that they're working together with, countries in the region to compete or at least stave off a larger power that looks to dominate, and that's China. They want to dominate that region, and so that's why you have countries like South Korea working with countries like Japan, where there has been great animosity over the years, dating back, you know, going back to World
But
War
to my
II.
knowledge, sir, they're also working with Russia.
Well, yeah, they're also working with Russia, and that's one of the things that when you don't have consistent U.S. foreign policy, and we're trying to get towards a consistent U.S. foreign policy, we see this in other areas. Countries start to hedge their bets. They will start to look, and they'll have one foot in one camp working with a bunch of allies, but they'll also look to Russia, and at the same time, understanding that North Korea is that great threat to them. So they have to hedge their bets. We put them in a difficult situation sometimes. They live in a dangerous neighborhood, so they have to watch themselves. Their natural threat is North Korea and China. So they're naturally going to reach out to Japan and the other nations around there, Philippines, anything in the South China Sea, and then also to Russia, which has traditionally served as a counterbalance to China, but we're not seeing that right now. That's a little dangerous in my estimation.
Mr. Sadler, what role does technology, including AI, play in shaping the APEC agenda and regional cooperation?
Yeah, this is perhaps a positive, but again, one that's cautionary. The era of artificial intelligence has been accelerating. I think it's a lot more advanced than most people appreciate. It can be a tool to greatly expand human productivity and also accelerate the ability to learn and also to grasp very complex and massive amounts of data quickly to basically assist our day-to-day decision making. But again, the potential use of this for bad and malign purposes is also just as well. Perhaps shaping the way people think through cognitive warfare comes to mind and is something that needs to be considered very seriously in these economic fora like APEC. But as to whether or not we're going to see anything meaningful come out of this summit and changing of the trends or the patterns that we've seen so far for the past few years, and even more importantly, investment in this, I would be surprised if there's anything that slows it down.
So your narrative, Mr. Sadler, on how critical is semiconductor supply chain security in the context of U.S.-China rivalry, and in what ways do tariffs and rare earth export control shape this summit's economic dynamics?
Well, certainly the Chinese Communist Party wants access to more advanced microelectronics. Simply invading Taiwan is not going to do that for them. So I don't buy into the notion that, one of the motivations for attacking and taking over Taiwan would be access to higher end, high-tech microelectronics. The reason for that is much different. But focusing just on the microelectronics, the microchips, the United States has tried to diversify the global supply chain. It's a vulnerability of not just the U.S., but it's one also of many of our European partners and allies as well. So getting more of this production, and I would say not just the high end, but also the day-to-day run-of-the-mill microelectronics are also necessary to operate the cars that we drive today, the aircraft that we fly on to travel, as well as the weapon and missile systems at the very bleeding edge of technology require, from the mundane to the very capable.
In this context, the United States needs China.
No, not necessarily. We need more Taiwan and South Korea and Japan than we need China in this. China needs access to the high-end microelectronics from the U.S.
It's a win-win situation then, sir. China needs something from the U.S. and the U.S. needs something from China.
This is one of the issues that many people think will come up in the summit between Trump and Xi Jinping in a few hours. Again, if that meeting occurs, basically a very transactional supply of rare earths in tons versus, thousands of microelectronics to continue to supply China's economy and also the war building efforts.
Mr. Calamel, how have South Korea's recent diplomatic engagements with the United States China and Japan influence its position at APEC?
I think it's just short up its position. There's been very little deviation. I mean, you talked about early on tactical versus strategic. There's no, I don't see there's any change in the strategic objectives or outcomes. There's some tactical moves here, but Korea, as Mr. Sadler was saying, is working together with Japan and other countries in this, and they're an important economic power in this semiconductor place, and China wants access to these semiconductors. And in the United States, we're also trying to, I know with certain schools in higher education that there's been a heavy emphasis on high-end programs producing at MIT, RIT, these technology schools with the high-end semiconductors. So Korea will always have a very important place. We have to look at some of the brands that come out of there that flood the U.S. market: Hyundai, Kia, Samsung. They're part of every day of our lives. So Korea plays an important part in the region. It plays an important part in maintaining stability in the region, but it's vulnerable, and that's where we need to always throw our backing behind South Korea.
Mr. Sadler, what are of course I can figure out that both my distinguished guests are on the same page. Mr. Sadler, what are your views on Trump's proposal for a third summit with Kim Jong-un during this trip? Real diplomatic opportunity or political distraction?
Well, I think the odds are very low for a host of reasons. One, first, the power dynamic today versus during Trump's first term between North Korea and its neighbors is very different. North Korea has troops fighting in Ukraine right now. North Korea has citizens in Russia at factories supporting Russia's wartime economy. And of course, money and technology from Russia is flowing into North Korea's military. That wasn't the case 6 years ago. So there's some thorny issues that make an unconventional personal meeting not as likely. But again, the two actually have a history. I wouldn't put it past. And I think unconventional is the new conventional approach to dealing with North Korea, to at least to get to a better détente type relationship. So I wouldn't say it's not possible, but I'd say the odds are very thin that we'll see any type of personal meeting between Kim Jong-un and President Trump.
Mr. Karamel, given North Korea's recent military tests in alignment with Russia, how does this impact U.S. deterrence strategies in Asia?
I'm going to fall back on what Mr. Sadler was saying here, is that, they're a little bit stretched and they're moving in different areas. Missile tests, they've been doing this for quite some time. It's just kind of the way North Korea has operated. I think the U.S. would absolutely like to get back to a détente type of scenario. The only problem is every time we have a meeting with the Koreans, if you go back to the Clinton administration, when actually Jimmy Carter made a surprise flight out there and signed an agreement with Kim Jong-un's father or grandfather that wasn't worth the paper it was written on, because they violated every line of it, and it was related to the nuclear program. So there is talk about the nuclear program and having that discussion around the nuclear program, but I don't see where that goes, and the chances of a meeting happening, as Mr. Sadler said, are very slim.
Why, sir? Why don't you see chances of a meeting happening?
Well, with Trump and Kim Jong-un, I think there's a lot on the plate right now. Number two, Trump may propose it, but Kim Jong-un, it's going to be up to him. How is he going to leverage this? Will he leverage this? What does he want out of these talks? I don't feel as though this is the priority of this trip. And just to have a one-off meeting with him, it just doesn't make sense to me. And my biggest concern is that a meeting with him just serves propaganda purposes. Whenever you have a meeting with Kim Jong-un,
but Trump mentioned that he might meet him.
Yeah, I know. Trump said that, and that's one of the things I have troubles with is when Trump decides to meet with a despot like Kim Jong-un, is that, send somebody else, send somebody like Rubio would be my estimation, because he's the one that understands this the best. Trump, he's doing this. Trump is a negotiator. He's a tactician in this sense, and he throws things out there and he sees what's going to happen. I'm not going to try and read Donald Trump's mind. What I do know is that just by throwing it out there, he's looking for a reaction from Kim Jong-un. It's a
That's your
probe.
point, and I'll leave it there. Mr. Sadler, do you want to comment on Mr. Kalaman?
No, I think again, if we're talking about the potentials for a new relationship with North Korea, I think the ball's really in Pyongyang's court, unfortunately, because of their significant commitments to supporting Russia. And so the motive for Kim Jong-un to kind of revive his relationship with Trump is significantly lesser than it was then. But again, I give it small odds, but a meeting at the DMZ, it's not that, that's not beyond the realm of possible. But again, very unlikely for a handshake across the DMZ repeat that we saw years ago.
Mr. Kalamel, how might unresolved issues like fentanyl control and technology exports play into border U.S.-China tensions?
Well, that's a huge tension. Fentanyl, we know that it's being shipped into the United States via Mexico and through Canada as well, and that's causing a lot of deaths. And that goes to the unrestricted warfare that has to go with drug warfare in the military doctrine. So that's a major concern. The question is, does Trump attack it there in China and discuss it there and put it on the table, or does he attack it at the borders? Does he attack it before it comes across the border or at the borders?
Sir, knowing Trump well as the President of the United States, you know that he discusses everything everywhere, and he decides to discuss anything he wants to discuss and say spontaneously anything he wants to say when he decides to. He doesn't have an agenda, and he doesn't read from papers, and he's not that systematic when it comes to discussing whatever he wants to or whatever he wants to elaborate or say. So what is your take on this?
Well, my take is that he's as far as foreign policy goes, he's a master at this because he's keeping his adversaries kind of off balance. If you look at his first term and then you look at the first, we're coming up on the first year of this term.
They're very different.
They're very different, but you'll see that he will throw out ideas, terms, and just not go along with it, or just to see what the reaction is. In other cases, he will say, I'll use the Iranian nuclear program, for example. He put them on a 60-day window, and the Islamic Republic thought they could fiddle around a little bit longer. On day 61, the Israelis hit him.
Of course, it's worth to mention that everything will be more open and to discussion after the summit takes place. And all of us, of course, understand more. But until then, Mr. Sadler, to what extent might Trump's tariff threats affect the stability of the regional economy?
Well, I think it's important to think of the tariffs as just another lever of national power connected to security as well as diplomacy. It's not just an economic ends tool of national power in the way Trump has been wielding. It's the same way that other countries use their tariffs, their economic tools and levers to influence their neighbors and even the United States in their diplomacy and also security relationships. So we're seeing a return to normalcy or realism in the way in which America executes its statecraft. So tariffs have been used to get peace treaties. The one that President Trump mentioned most recently was the threat over tariffs to get both Cambodia and Thailand to knock off the fighting at their border and to enter into negotiation. The same was used against India and Pakistan. The same was used with Rwanda, Congo, and added a little extra spice with potential developmental assistance in mining to get rare earths and other critical minerals out of the Congo that would benefit all parties.
And Ukraine as well, sir.
What's that?
Ukraine as well.
There's a hope there, but Russia, unfortunately, is a much harder nut to crack. The money, and I think this is because for China too, trade and prosperity are not part of the equation for their execution of their national interest. Their national interest in Russia case is the destruction of Ukraine. No money is going to change that by itself. China, it's the dominance of the Chinese Communist Party around its near abroad, most importantly, Taiwan. No amount of money or trade or prosperity is going to dissuade them from that. So it's a different approach, perhaps more of the military and more of the coercive side of national power that has to be used against those types of foes.
Thank you very much, Adrian Calamel and Brent Sadler, for sharing your expert perspectives on this crucial moment in Asia-Pacific diplomacy. And of course, for being very two distinguished guests that I had today in my episode. And of course, I'd wish that we would continue this wonderful interview after the summit and discuss the outcome of everything that took place in this summit. Thank you very much for your informative knowledge and for your time and for being with us in today's episode of Q News. That concludes our deep dive into Trump's Asia return and the complexities shaping APEC 2025. That brings us to the end of today's episode of Think Tank, which always unveils the complexities of our changing world. Thank you very much for watching and stay tuned for more updates on Q News. From me, myself, Rana Qassas. Thank you very much for watching and goodbye.